Hey guys, welcome back to BCM and AM episode 3. We're going to be talking about anxiety and the gospel today, and we have just a myriad of people on that I'm so excited to have. We've got Kate White over here. Say hi, Kate.
Hey, I'm a sophomore here at the University of Tennessee. Woo. That's pretty much all I got.
And we have Samm Hawes.
Hey guys, I am so glad to be back with you all today.
Myself, I'm Zach, and this is Jarrod Justice.
How's it going, guys? Honored to be here. I'm Jarrod Justice. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist here at Haven Counseling Center. So it's a privilege to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we're happy to have all you guys. We're so excited about this. So diving into this topic right off the bat, what is the first thing that comes to your mind when I say the catch-all word anxiety?
Well, for me personally, it's like when you get this nervous thought and then it just manifests. And like for me, when I get anxious, like I get kind of sick to my stomach. So like just like that icky feeling of like something bad could happen.
Yeah, I almost always have a physical response when my anxious thoughts become consuming, you know, and that's what I think. When I think of anxiety, I think of like anxious thoughts that are consuming and they just stick around, kind of like gum on the bottom of your shoe.
Yeah. What do you think about counseling?
What do I think when I hear the word anxiety? I think I have anxious thoughts about trying to even define it. But I relate to, Kate and Sam. I think there's some things I feel in my body. I might have a shortness of breath, or I might kind of bounce my leg or feel sort of jittery, depending upon how much coffee I've had too. I could be a bit more
That's
anxious.
always a contributing factor for certain.
100%. I know for me it definitely is. If I'm 3 coffees in, I know that my anxiety level can rise and fall with the moment. That's very true.
Yeah.
So, speaking of anxiety, it sounds like we gave a pretty negative connotation to it. Is there any time in which, stress is a good thing in our lives?
Yeah, so I like the question. I think the first thought would be, I don't know if any of us really enjoy being stressed, but it's something that we all experience. And so then I think probably our response to stress is what can be either good or sort of impairing to whatever we're doing. So say I'm stressed because I have a final coming up, or I have a job interview. So sometimes a bit of stress can motivate me to respond and prepare. Other times I might be impaired by stress where I might sort of run away into things like escapism with Netflix and chill, and I realize, it's been 8 hours and I've not done that thing. And so sometimes we can avoid whatever we're stressed about, and that can actually compound the anxiety, compound the stress. So sometimes when I think about what's good about it, it may just be more an opportunity for me to think through, how can I really take care of myself? What's good planning here? What's, the resources I need? I know we'll probably get into some of that to sort of navigate these stressors in my life.
Right. Sometimes stress can feel exciting though.
Yeah.
Like, if it doesn't always have to be like a negative. Sometimes I feel those butterflies in my stomach right before I'm doing a speaking engagement or TNT. And it's both like, I'm nervous, I'm a little stressed about how I'm going to be received, but it's also exciting because I have this opportunity. And sometimes that stress can also make me, have a better performance or improve my reactivity to things. So I definitely think there can be good stress. If we respond well to it. I love that it's in our response that stress becomes good or bad.
Yeah.
So I think that's really, really poignant.
Yeah. Yeah, no kidding. So with that being the case, what does it depend on our response when it starts to cross into, when general worry about something crosses into anxiety? Is it more about the response that we have in the general worry, or is it more about the thing that it is we're worried about? Does that make sense in the question?
I think I'm catching what you're asking here. So I think it's really normal. It's a very human thing for us to be worried. I think that from a biblical perspective, Jesus talks about some of these things, to not worry about tomorrow because today has enough worry of its own. I think just currently, right, with the year 2020, with COVID, with racial tensions, with the political landscape that feels so confusing at times, the holidays coming up, are we going to shut down? Are we not? Do I wear a mask here? Do I not here? I love my grandparents. I want to see them. And so there can be, I think, so much worry about the future and uncertainty. That is such a human thing. So the moment to moment, there's going to be hints of anxiety.
Yeah.
I think we all are going to deal with that because we're human. And I do think that what makes something move more into sort of like an anxiety disorder, something that like the DSM-5, the diagnostics of this from a clinical perspective, it's important to note that it's got to be a clinically significant impairment or distress in vocation, in social settings, and other areas of functioning. So I might be worried about this situation, and that might be stressful, but I'm probably not in this place of diagnosing myself, which isn't a good idea.
Right.
To in the moment, like, oh, I must have generalized anxiety disorder because I have a calculus, test coming up.
Stay away from WebMD on that.
Yeah. So giving yourself maybe a bit of compassion. I talk a lot about self-compassion in my office and kindness to yourself because number one, we all have different weaknesses and cracks in our lives, and you throw a pandemic on top of that, and you better believe those cracks are going to be a little bit bigger. And so something like anxiety, you might tend to be a more anxious person. So are you going to be dealing or struggling with more worry, with more stress, with more anxiety this time of year? I think maybe so. And there's different factors sort of biologically to think about, psychologically, socially, spiritually to think about. So it's the answer sometimes is it depends, depending upon really what is happening in that person's life. And then culturally, like I said, with what's going on with COVID, that we're all probably dealing with a little bit of anxiety and depression right now.
I've even heard that we're experiencing a global trauma. It being referred to as such because it is such a different experience for every person walking this earth. Like encountering how one lives through a pandemic is kind of like a mutual trauma. And so I thought that was really interesting. I do think that adds a layer. Every student I've talked to, I mean, I'm sure you can speak to that, Kate, about how being a student in the midst of this pandemic has challenged or increased maybe your worry.
And mentally, it's like really challenging because like it's, do I go out? Do I stay in? If I do go out, when is a good time to go out? Do I take my mask off when walking to the cafeteria? Like just like those thoughts in general are just really stressful. And like half the time, like I'm in my room and I'm by myself for most of the semester because my roommate went home. She was like, I have a baby brother. I need to move back home in order to, like, in order to protect him, I need to be there rather than here.
Yeah.
And, like, in general, I'm an overthinker, and now that I'm by myself, it's just, like, I overthink even more, and, like, I have to, like, learn how to control it, so.
Yeah, no, that's good. Okay, thank you for sharing that. You know, when you were saying, Sam, about a global trauma, I mean, I think the way that we respond sort of biologically, physiologically, to touch on that, I think it's important to recognize even just what's happening in the brain or what's happening in our bodies in response to stress. We're all limited because we're human. We're not unlimited in our ability to respond. So we have limits. Think of like a bucket or something that you're filling up and it gets to a certain place and it's going to spill out the top or break through the bottom. But Dan Siegel, in his work out of UCLA, he talks about the concept of the window of tolerance. And so if you think about your optimal performance, sort of a river of wellness in the middle, this is going to be sunny 70, things are going well. I'm probably not going to be anxious or depressed. I'm probably not going to be dealing with sort of these extremes in my mood or my thoughts or my behaviors. But let's, as we talk about anxiety, so think about it in terms of I'm moving outside of my ability to cope. I'm moving outside of my ability to respond well. I might go into more of what would be called a hyper arousal place, sort of an anxious place, a panicked place, shortness of breath. I might be sweating. I might be panicked on the inside. My thoughts could be anxious thoughts. And so part of it is learning that we go a bit into those fight or flight responses with anxiety. So I'm going to try to attack this thing. I'm going to be sort of hyper vigilant, or I'm going to run away. And so some of it is actually good in that we're learning our limitations, and how to cope with it might be then how do we calm ourselves down? How do we create a schedule that's going to be more realistic? How do we eat well, exercise? We can go into some of the coping, sleep well. But understanding it from that biological place, I think, is really important too. Because we can even think like, oh, I'm bad. It's like, I can't handle this. Well, maybe you can't handle that, and that's okay.
Right.
Because we each have sort of a different capacity with different things. And so for me, just to be honest, especially as I get older, I really need a little more sleep. I do. I'm not a 17-year-old playing baseball all the time and can stay up all hours of the night, you know? And so learning our limitations can actually help our wellness, and especially with something like anxiety, that I'm learning how to cope in a healthy way versus a negative way.
Oh, yeah. An example for myself would be, as kind of more of an introverted person, I have to recognize that when I'm overstimulated, I need to take a break from people, because I'm not going to find my biological response lowering or tempering in the midst of a large crowd. And so knowing yourself and your limitations that you talk about, man, that just sets you up for success. This is not diminishing who God created you to be, but understanding who God created you to be. And I love this idea of window of tolerance. I'm really looking forward to looking into more of that, because I haven't heard that phrase before, but that sounds really, really helpful to think about.
Yeah. I love that when you brought up some of the ways that we try and like respond are fight or flight. And I think that's exactly what we see when it comes to anxiety around like around the people's response to COVID, is that people will like either retreat back into a hole somewhere, or they'll like say, I am too tough for it to hurt me. And they'll rip off masks, be brash in all circumstances, and be kind of judgmental toward people that are more willing to come back. And I think that I think you made a really good point. Like, we're seeing two extremes in which that's not necessarily the response we should have. Like, we should be willing to bring ourselves back down. And so I think to get us more toward, you know, the practical side of things, to how do we bring ourselves back down? How do we deal with anxiety? What are some characters that we see out of the Bible? What are some people that we see out of the Bible that display anxiety that we can kind of either identify with, or we can see how they handled it and deal with it better? Or what are some characters?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think these are maybe sensitive waters, talking about what biblical characters might display anxiety. I think that I'll offer my opinion on it. I think that when I read scripture, especially the Psalms, I think that there's a real permission to be human.
Yes.
I think about even like a Psalm 62:8 that talks about trusting in the Lord with all your heart. Pour out your heart to him, for God is a refuge to us. And that's a bit of my paraphrase. I missed a word or two there. But I think the pouring out our heart to the Lord, I think we see that with David. We see that with the psalmist. Think about Job. What kind of anxiety might he have felt losing his livestock?
Of course.
Losing family, losing, his own health, boils, and wondering if he's going to die. And the whole book, the oldest manuscript that we have from scripture is the book of Job, and this wrestling that you see with the stress and the circumstances of this calamity that came. And wait, God, are you here for me? Just these questions that I think we see in all the biblical characters. I mean, even like a Psalm 22 that Jesus quotes on the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me? This absolute humanness that we see in Jesus. Now, the dual natures of Christ must be, we've got to hold that up, 100% God, 100% man.
Yeah.
But even thinking about Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, sweating drops of blood.
That doesn't seem like an easy moment if you're sweating drops of blood.
That's fair.
It's not an easy moment.
No.
I mean, call it what you want. Call it stress. Call it anxiety. Call it fear that his life was going to be sacrificed for the sin of the world, knowing that was the will of the Father, but him yielding to the Father's will, and that place of humanness, it makes me think of Hebrews 4, where we also get to sympathize, or Jesus sympathizes with us in our weakness.
Yeah.
So he was tempted in every way. I mean, he experienced humanness in every way for us that we do, but he was without sin. So then that invitation to boldly approach the throne of grace in our time of need, to find this help, find this mercy.
Right.
And so I guess to answer about the biblical characters in Scripture, I mean, I think all of them, because they were human. Yeah. There's something about, I mean, I was thinking about how stressful it must have been for Noah to build the ark.
Right.
Yeah. Or how stressful, how anxious Abraham must have been.
Yes.
Being called to Esther,
approaching the throne room of the king. I mean,
she
was even like, "Are you sure?" I mean, you just see that hesitation all over Scripture. I think it would be harder to find someone who wasn't.
Yeah.
Martha, Mary. Yeah. What did Jesus do when Lazarus died? He didn't say, "Hey, it's okay, guys. Don't be anxious here. I've got this." Mm-hmm. No. Instead, what happened in that story is that Jesus wept with them.
Right.
We use these words of like he was deeply moved, but when you look into this, what does deeply moved in spirit mean? I mean, this was this almost an ugly cry, like this braying like a horse. I mean, he was moved deeply with sadness, with distress about a friend dying, even though he knew that he would be raised up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mary and Martha was actually the story that originally came to my mind because when I was in college, I read a book, Having a Mary Heart in the Martha World, and it's referring to the story when Jesus comes to the house of Martha and Mary, and Martha is busy running around trying to make the preparations, and Mary is in the room with the men at the feet of Jesus, and Martha comes in and starts complaining to Jesus, which, bold strategy, Martha, I love it. But she goes to say, "Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Tell her then to help me." And Jesus answers her, "Martha, Martha, you're anxious and troubled about many things." He's calling out, like, I know you're worried, but you're not just worried about me at your house. You're worried about many things. Yeah. But one thing is necessary, and Mary has chosen the good portion, and it will not be taken away from her. Yeah. And that just was always such a peaceful thing for me to know that my busyness and my anxiousness added nothing to the kingdom of God.
Yeah.
My hurrying and my flustered trying to do things contributed nothing to the glory of God, because he is glorious in and of himself, and is fulfilled and complete without me trying to throw extra things into his well-being.
Yeah.
So Mary has chosen the good thing, and I love doing things for the Lord, but I have to recognize my best thing is sitting at his feet and soaking in his goodness.
Yeah.
So
I can't tell you how many guys that I deal with on a day-to-day basis that deal with anxiety, but they don't want to express it. Mm-hmm. And so like they'll stifle it down, or they're dealing with hard things in their lives, and they just want to push it off and keep trudging ahead. And I think that's something that we don't really see in the Bible. We don't see this like building up of stuff and then throwing it over to the side, And my mind goes to Moses at first because of like him being called into, he had to go talk to Pharaoh. That's his first job, being called by God. Is like he has a death warrant out on his life, and he has to go talk to the guy that issued the warrant, right? Like I get anxiety just talking about it, but that's something else that we're having to deal with. Is like how do we practically approach this? Because I feel like a lot of people try to address anxiety in their own way, and it can get really toxic, for lack of a better word,
Yeah.
because they're wanting to go down their own road. So what would you say is like a practical way to deal with anxiety?
Well, and I like what you're saying there, Zach, and Sam too, about Mary and Martha. I think the emphasis, spiritually here on who Jesus is for us in the midst of our hard circumstances.
Of course.
Like, who is God for me when I'm stressed out?
Of course.
Who is my rock?
Mm-hmm.
Where's my lighthouse when the waves are crashing around?
Mm-hmm.
Is he really a refuge for me?
Mm-hmm.
Can I lean on him? Can he be my stability when I'm really freaking out? Just to say it kind of that way.
Yeah.
I think for me personally, I think back to a couple years ago, just going through a really hard time, feeling really anxious about some different transitions in my life. And I try to do a lot of outside time and love to take a jog down by the river. If you've ever been down to Sequoia Hills, it's just really gorgeous along the river there. But I was so anxious and needed to have some time just on the bench there looking at the river. Picked up a piece of bark and was just trying to be mindful in the moment. Was trying to slow my breathing down, was trying to be present in the moment, because that's part of what anxiety is that I can't just be still in the now. And so part of it for me was picking up this piece of bark and being mindful. And this piece of bark and the river, they're not worried about, they're not stressed out. The birds aren't stressed out about the things that I am.
Right.
And so being in this moment, and who is God for me, that he is my rock, he is faithful. And those are the kinds of moments where you start to notice, even in your own body, becoming more relaxed. The circumstance might not go away. Like the waves might still be crashing. There could be the medical concern. There could be the bad breakup. There could be the thing with mom and dad. There could be something that's really, really worrisome. But having that anchor of who God is for me, along with something like a practical thing of just learning some deep breathing exercises, learning some muscle relaxation exercises. These are some of the things I teach in my office, something like deep breathing, to give you kind of the 30-second version of that, is to really slow your breath down, where you think about taking in the air through your nose, letting it go all the way in and down, letting that diaphragm really open up. If you've ever done any singing or some choir, you definitely want to sing from down here, not from your throat. I'm kind of pointing to my belly here as I'm talking, but you want to breathe in, really slowing it down through your nose. Take that good. I like to hold it for about 4 counts. And then if you can imagine blowing like on a cup of soup, because it's so hot, and kind of blowing it out really, really slowly and thoughtfully.
Yeah.
And so I will teach this in session, and it is such an important tool, I think, in coping with anxiety, that you can do anywhere, anytime. You can do it in class. You can do it in traffic. You can do it in the restaurant when you're stressed out or freaking out. So something like that, what it's doing is it's actually, you're getting more oxygen to the brain. So you are literally telling your body that things are more okay than what you might have experienced otherwise. So that'd be one thing. Maybe I'll stop there. Any comments on that, Sam or Kate or Zach?
Within the past few months, like, I've heard like this over and over again, especially by the pastor Craig Grishel. Like, if it's enough to worry about, it's enough to pray about. Like, just like if you start to worry about it, pray about it. Which
it's a good way to address it.
Yeah,
I like that.
One of the things I think about is learning. You talked earlier, Jarrod, about the biological response.
Right.
Learning the language of anxiety in my life. Like, how is that expressed? And understanding that, because, I might have an increased heart rate, Zach may not have an increased heart rate. So one thing that's helpful is to learn the personal manifestations of that, so I can recognize it earlier on.
Exactly.
And then also learning to name it. And not allowing it to be this kind of like quiet, ebbing and flowing thing, but like
Yeah.
naming it and owning it so that we can process through it, and I can process through it in healthy manners. And so I
Yes.
think that's one of the things that's been a really practical way that I've
That's
addressed
good.
it in my life.
Yeah, there's an exercise that's helpful along those same lines where you're identifying triggers.
Yes.
You're identifying your body signs to go along with those triggers.
Mm.
And then what are the resources that might help you go back from sort of this hyper arousal place back into the window of tolerance, kind of that river of wellness that we talked about.
Mm-hmm.
And so a trigger might be something that is so subtle. It could be seeing an ex-boyfriend or an ex-girlfriend.
Mm-hmm.
And so you begin to feel in your body these anxious feelings or having anxious thoughts. You might be flushed. You might be sweating. You might be, moving your leg up and down. You might be pacing. Then being aware of that, it might be that just doing something like some deep breathing could help bring your body responses back into that more optimal zone.
Mm-hmm.
I will say other things practically that are helpful. Calling a trusted friend.
Yeah.
Yes.
Do we need people during this time? Absolutely.
100%.
Who are the safe and trustworthy friends that you can reach out to and talk through some of this stuff? Because just because you think it doesn't mean it's true. Just because you're feeling it doesn't mean that it's true. So
That's
kind
right.
of if you can name it, you can tame it, this sort of a thing. Sort of get up on top of it versus it being on top of you.
Mm-hmm.
And so some of that is so what's happening, I think, socially and even psychologically is I was made for connection. I was made for relationship.
Yeah.
So let's take something like even to take it a bit further. Really, how are you dealing with your emotions through some of these things? Like, how are emotions handled in your family?
Yeah.
How are you, coping with some of the feelings that you're having? So saying something like, I'm lonely, or I'm hurt, or I'm sad, or I'm afraid, saying that out loud to a friend, or even writing it into your journal, it allows you to name it, allows you to sort of externalize what's happening so that you then can know who God is for you in the midst of whatever you're feeling.
Right.
Because we can become impaired. Let's take loneliness, which I think is a very anxiety-provoking place to be. I don't know about you guys. I don't like being isolated or alone.
Mm.
I'm quite the extrovert, but I'm a bit more introverted as I've gotten older. But I think, so if I'm feeling lonely, so if I'm impaired by that place, okay, if I'm impaired by being lonely, I might go further into isolation, further into like, oh, well, no one likes me, self-pity. I don't have any friends, this kind of thing. Or in pride, it might be this like, well, I don't need anybody. But what is that emotion telling us? That emotion, something like loneliness, is telling us that we were made for connection. We were made for relationship with Jesus. We were made for relationship with others.
Right.
So it gets us back to even circle back at the beginning. It's not that being lonely or being anxious or being sad is wrong.
Right.
It's how am I moving towards God and others in the midst of that? So something like loneliness, who is God for me? Well, He's Emmanuel, God with me. Though I feel alone, I'm not alone. So there's this opportunity to mature and to grow and to find some stability in God, but also in community.
Right.
So that comes to mind too, because it's such a stressful, anxious place. I mean, think about all the virtual learning that the students are having to do. Think about how isolated people are right now, and how anxious that can be. Oh, I'm on an island. What am I going to do? There can be that feeling that you're not going to be able to make it through. And so just being arm in arm with others. I mean, going outside, sit around a fire, talk about how you're feeling. This kind of social engagement is definitely a part of calming the whole situation in your life, possibly.
Well, and it goes back to the isolation. When you think that you're the only one struggling,
yes,
it becomes a deeper pit of shame that can sometimes feel hard to get out of. But by speaking it out into community, what you're often going to find, what I found time and time again, is people say, oh, yeah? Me too.
Yeah, me too.
Me too, right? You don't feel alone.
And there's so much power that God has created in community, and perfection community always existed. In the Trinity,
Yes.
community existed. Community
Yeah.
is
Mhm.
meant to be this place of holiness. So I
Yeah.
love that point. I think
Yeah.
that's so practical, and it is at the tip of your fingertips right now
Yeah.
with the way technology has crafted the ability to be in community,
Yeah.
man.
Yeah.
It's really cool.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's, I love that. I love that. I feel like I need to pay you after we leave because I feel like I'm getting a session for free while
I
I'm here.
appreciate that.
This is so good. And I love that. I love that we're talking about, that's something else I deal with a lot of guys with is like, how do we take emotions and deal with them in a healthy manner, and how do they point us back to the Father? You know, I had a guy I was talking to, I don't know, maybe last week, and we were talking about and working through his parents' divorce in comparison to my parents being divorced, and we were saying like, you know, we have to not just sit in the fact that there's anger there.
Right.
We have to also mourn the thing. And one of the best counseling things that I heard in the midst of going through that with my wife is that, you know, we have to also mourn the things that were good out of it and not just the things that were angry, that we're mad at.
Mhm.
And at the end of it, if it drives us to just hate them more, that's not the point. The emotion is supposed to drive us back to the Father.
Mhm.
And it's supposed to say, I'm sad because this is a flawed image of something that you created that was supposed to be a perfect image. And I'm angry because this is a flawed image, and it's supposed to point me back to who Jesus created this image to be.
Yes.
And I think it's so good, and I love that we're talking about that. So I really hope that this guy in particular listens to this podcast. I need to listen to it after this. But so we're talking about a lot of things that we can do to push ourselves back to Jesus, or to even lean on the fact that God is always calling us back to
Yes.
himself.
Mhm.
What are times in which, like at what point is there this crossover to where we need to start seeking some professional help in this? Because
Yeah.
I know a lot of people sit here and they'll dig themselves in such a hole that they don't want to go to somebody else for help.
Right.
And so at what point is it,
It's a good question.
I don't know, I know I'm trying to say like, how far is too far? And I know that's not the question to ask.
Right.
But in your professional opinion, like where is the boundaries to where we should seek professional help?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. I think that first, just personally, part of what got me into this profession was that I had gotten to a place, just really tough place in my marriage and just personally, where I really needed some help outside of what I could do on my own. And so I was limited. I was stressed out. I was trying to pastor a church and learn to preach every week. And we had 3 kids, 5 and under at the time. And so we did some marriage counseling for about a year. And so the help that had been given to me during that time, what God did in me during that time, was part of what even perked my interest to want to go back and get a professional degree in marriage and family therapy.
Yeah.
And so I think that, to answer the question point blank, I think that, I'm a big advocate for getting the help that you need.
Right.
You know, some people might need to just come in for a few sessions and sort of get a little tune up and no big deal. But other times there could be some layers to some things, especially from family of origin, or if there's trauma or abuse in someone's background. These are things that, professionals are trained, therapists are equipped to help. And sometimes it takes a bit longer than you would think to get back to a well place.
Yeah.
And so how far is too far, this kind of a thing, I think, when it goes beyond just a bit of worry that's situationally, or a bit of stress that's sort of because this circumstance is happening, that's more of a stress. When it's more of a deeper anxious place, or moving into something like an anxiety disorder, where over time, we're talking months and months and months, where you're really having trouble sleeping. It's affecting every part of your life, not just one particular part. It's going to be really important, I think, to get some help so that you can get to a place of more consistent wellness. What I was going to say too is there's a really great resource just that would be helpful, I think, back to the emotions conversation. There's a book by the name, it's called The Voice of the Heart by Chip Dodd. And he talks about how our emotions really are windows into the longings of the human heart. So they are when I'm feeling whatever I'm feeling, this is helping me know how I was made. And so there may be different things that I have to really be honest about how I'm doing so that I can move in the right direction versus being impaired. So
whenever a student comes in my office and asks me, oh, I've been wrestling with this for a while, do you think I should go to counseling? Often my response has been, well, why wouldn't you?
Yeah.
I've often talked about in my marriage with my husband, we go to counseling regularly because we want to get there before problems arise. Yeah. It's like, you don't want to just go to the doctor when your foot's turned gangrene. Like, there's no reason not to go. There's so many resources at our fingertips here in Knoxville, here at the University of Tennessee. I'll never forget sitting with a student, an international student from India, who was flabbergasted by the resources we had for mental health. Yeah. It is so shameful. It is so repugnant that you would need mental health in that country where he was from, that city specifically where he was from, that he was just like, why wouldn't everyone go? It's so helpful. And so breaking the stigma that therapy is only for like tremendous issues is, I think, one of the things that, we can have conversations about. I tell my students that I've been to counseling many times over my 33 years of life, and it is so beneficial. Sometimes I come in with something specific to talk about, and sometimes it's like you said, a tune-up. Love that, phraseology, Jarrod. Right. Sometimes it's coming in for a tune-up. So if you're asking yourself, should I go to therapy? My question back to you is, well, why wouldn't you? So.
It's really good. I'm not sure what our time is like here, but one story that I like to tell is about my first car. You guys remember your first car?
Yes.
So I had a 1986 Pontiac. It was this little white thing that I drove around a small town in Texas where I grew up, and I drove around. It was really, really fun, right, to have your new wheels. And it was just a dumb teenager mistake, but I started driving around and noticing that the brake light was coming on every time I would mash the brakes. And I'm like, oh, that's weird. And I just kept driving around. And then to my shock, I was so surprised and horrified that my brakes went out about 6 weeks later. And I could have been killed. I could have killed someone else. Luckily, I went down into this sort of grassy ditch and stopped. But we can drive around. Just to use the metaphor, like we can drive around with like sadness flashing on the dashboard of our soul. We can drive around with, anger or hurt or fear, where it's like just blinking and we're like, oh, no big deal. And we just try to ignore it. But there's going to be consequences to ignoring our emotions. Yeah. Just like there's going to be consequences if we explode with our emotions. Yeah. So I talk about, it's a weird way to say it maybe, but sort of like a dormant volcano. It's like, if I'm ignoring my emotions, then it's like this sleeping volcano ready to explode. And then I might go all the way over to, it's like Pompeii, and I'm exploding. So I talk about a more balanced way of dealing with emotions would be more of an oozing. And so this is a place I really encourage back to some practical things of journaling, of really having safe spaces with safe people to kind of really talk about how are you doing really? Because some of this is we need to be able to let out some of that and pop the hood, right? It might just be an oil change, or we might need to think about replacing the engine here. Yeah. So I like that as a metaphor to talk about how to sort of navigate some of these, because I think anxiety can really come out of some of those things that we might be avoiding talking about or avoiding really naming in our lives that we're dealing with. So it's been great talking about anxiety. I hope that's been a helpful take on it. It's just my opinion. I'm a counselor, just not the wonderful counselor. So
that's fair. I think that's good. I love that, because you talked about one of the practical ways of dealing with it was journaling. And I mean, my wife does journaling to help her. She's a very external processor. So like when she can like get alone and can journal, it's like she's externally processing with herself. Yep. And that helps her a lot, being able to go through things and do things. And like you said, you've done counseling. My wife and I have done counseling. We've been married for 3 years and been, I don't know how many sessions already, And I know that we're healthier for it. And I would say 100%, I agree. Like, if you're even thinking about it, you should already be there. You know, you should have already put it on the calendar kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So in terms of kind of bringing this all to a close, we talked about how community is important. We talked about how it's so important to have those people around us that can, you know, highlight things in our lives that are wrong and that need to be pointed back to the Lord, that need to be pointed to a place that is more healthy than they are now. Right. So what if I'm not the one dealing with it, though, and I'm the person seeing it in somebody else? Right. Like, how do I approach that particular situation?
Just, we don't want to put you on the spot, baby.
No, it's okay.
We were looking at Kate.
No, I have a friend who deals with anxiety and depression, and we were going over the questions this morning, and I asked her, she's just like, just talk to them, like, as often as you can, like, try to, like, be, like, that person that, like, they go to if, like, they need help, like, just be there for them, and if you think that they need, like, counseling or something like that, like, be encouraging and say it's okay, or, like, I'll even drive you there if you need.
Mm-hmm. That's good, Kate. Mm-hmm. Sounds like some real support there you're offering. It's good. Mm-hmm. I think that when I think about how to support others going through something like this, like a anxiety that's gone, you know, for a long time, or there's something deeper that's happening, it's very difficult to be, what I was going to say is sort of alongside them, but not try to fix them. Mm-hmm. And so I talk about sometimes this sort of witness. How do I, and part of it, right, is when I'm emotionally aware of what's happening in me, then I can offer the kind of empathy that I would want if I would, if I was going through the same thing.
I need to hear that. Yeah.
And so I had a supervisor one time talk to me about how curiosity is really the gateway to compassion. And so if I'm asking questions and I'm really seeking to understand, sometimes just that and validating the person's stress or anxiety could be the very thing that makes them feel like you're with them, not trying to fix them. And so I'm guilty of doing that, especially with my wife. She's like, I don't want you to fix me. I just want you to listen. I'm like, oh yeah, good reminder just to listen. So sometimes a listening ear is a really helpful thing. I think, encouraging them to sort of think about what they need. We can make suggestions. I think you need this, but maybe even helping them. Hey, what do you think you need right now? Hey, what's been helping? Has going for a walk helped? Has listening to music helped? Has changing up your diet helped? You have to have enough safety and trust to ask some of these things, but coming in and even acting like you know the answer is maybe not what's going to be helpful, but seeking to be sort of a curious, an open and curious and kind friend really offers some real great ways to move forward with it.
Yeah. I think for me, one of the things that's helped me is by being an example of communicating my own insecurities, my own emotions, and setting the example that this is a safe place to share those, that they are, that it's healthy to experience emotions when we're in a safe place and we can express those in ways that will honor one another. And so taking the microscope off of their situation and creating a more like communal, like, man, this is how I am wrestling. This is how I am feeling in the midst of the pandemic. This is how I'm feeling. And even using a variety of emotional terms. That's one of the big things I teach my kids is like, we talk about like, okay, right now you're seeming angry. Is that frustration? Is that discouragement? And so widening the word usages of our emotions can also be something we really can set the example for, because you might sense that they're struggling with something, but they may not know the word to express it. Exactly. Or you might be assuming wrong that you know what the emotion they're expressing. So being an example of kind of like a vocabulary of emotion in that setting and speaking your own can often lead to a connection that leads to reciprocation of their own emotional well-being and range. So that's been something that's been helpful for me when I'm sitting across from friends and students.
That's really good.
Guys, that's awesome. I loved everything, and I think we're going to have to call it there for time's sake. And then, we'll see you guys again next week for the depression episode. Looking forward to that.
Yeah. Woo! What a lead-in, Zach.
Depression.
Talk to y'all soon.